welcome. We're really glad for all of you that are already here joining us for September session of Community Health Learning Collective. I'm going to give just a couple minutes because it's 12 on the dot to let people come in, but we're super excited about today's workshop. Feel free if you want to unmute and introduce yourself, or introduce yourself in the chat while we're waiting for everyone to join.
Okay, my name is Ray Serino. I work for Aging Care Connections, which is located in LaGrange, downtown LaGrange. This is going into my 4th or 5th month with the agency. So I'm fairly new, and there's a lot to learn. Sometimes I think I put too much pressure on myself. Because I'm trying to do the best I can, but you know, I think that's with all of us. We'll see how it goes. Now that I know that with the cold weather coming in, I know it's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Definitely, definitely, and I can relate. I think welcome, Ray, and I think you know, most of us do this work from the heart, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I also just want to say for folks that are folks who are out of state, that's LaGrange, Illinois. Most of us are coming to you from Chicago, Illinois.
I had something scheduled.
But we do have folks from all over the country. So welcome. Once again, I just want to say this is the Community Health Learning Collective. So this is a group for CHWs, Promotores de Salud, CHRs, or even people who aren't doing the work, but who just care about the health of their communities, right? This is just a space for us to learn and grow together. We're very informal. You can come once and never come again. You can come every time. We love to see you, but it's kind of a no strings attached place to gather and learn together, which is what we're going to be doing today. So I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Candace, please continue to admit people as they come, but we do have a lot to cover today. So again, Community Health Learning Collective, this group is facilitated by myself and the other 2 CHWs from the HAP Foundation. So I'm Maureen, Candace is here, Jenny is here. And today I'm going to be co-presenting with 2 great individuals from Arizona State University. So Mattea and Bianca, if you want to introduce yourselves and kind of get us kicked off.
Well, hello, everyone. I can start because I think Bianca's going to start us on the presentation as well. So my name is Mattea, and thank you, Maureen, for letting us join you today to talk about the Community Resiliency Model. So I'm with the Arizona State University Office of Community Health Engagement and Resiliency. We have a long title, so we call ourselves OCHER for short. And so today we're going to talk about the Community Resiliency Model with you, or CREM for short. So I will pass it over to Bianca to get us started.
Hi, everyone. So good morning. We're located in Tucson, so it's still morning for us, and good afternoon to all of you. So yeah, welcome. We're so excited to bring this over to Maureen's organization. Maureen was actually a part of our CHW cohort for receiving the training in the Community Resiliency Model. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we are part of Arizona State University, as Mattea was mentioning. I am one of the program coordinators and one of the trainers for the CREM model. So this model was actually developed by the Trauma Resource Institute. They are located in California. And we'll talk a little bit more about their work later on, but they're a great resource that we were able to collaborate with. It's a space where we're able to send CHWs like you all to receive the teacher training, just like Maureen did. So you all can bring CREM to your communities too. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end. But let's go ahead and begin. So for today's agenda, we kind of structured it in different parts. So we will be learning about the 3 basic wellness skills of the community resiliency model. There are a total of 6, but for today we will be we'll be learning about 3. So we'll start with a little bit of introducing what we do and the work that we do here in Tucson. And then we'll start with the concept number 1, which is Help Now. We do have a 5-minute break that we've put into this, so you can, take a stretch, get something to drink, grab a snack. And then we'll continue after maybe like an hour mark and continue learning about the concepts. We will do some practice skills so you all can get a taste of what CREM is and the skills. And then at the very end, we'll leave some time for a debrief, and we're going to send you a link to the evaluation and then learning about the opportunities we have for you all to receive the teacher training, like I had mentioned before.
Okay.
All right, so we love to start our workshops with introductions. I know you all did that a little bit, but we like to provide names or pronouns, and then something that gives you strength. So I'll go ahead and kick it off. So my name again is Bianca. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella. And something that brings me strength at this very moment, I've shared with my colleagues that me and my husband are hosting our wedding reception in 2 weeks. And so what brings me strength is my family, my husband, all the people that are involved, wedding planners, they're lifesavers. So in a time that's so chaotic and you're, doing a lot of things at the same time, definitely those other people that keep me grounded. So I'll popcorn it to Mattea.
Thanks, Bianca. I put mine in the chat too, but again, my name is Mattea, and I use she or they pronouns, and deep breaths bring me strength. When I really notice that my shoulders are getting high and I'm a little tense, if I take a deep breath, I can handle the next moment with a lot more strength. So thank you, Bianca. So we invite you, if you would like to come off mute and share what brings you strength in an intro if you haven't, or feel free to add it to the chat and we can all read our beautiful answers there as well.
So mine is reading affirmations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila Armour. I'm a community health worker. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a community health worker at Loyola Medicine. And my pronouns are she, her, and what gives me strength is my faith in God. That's what gives me strength.
All right. Does anyone else would like to share? I know the chat is going. I'm going to take it off actually because you'll can see it. But thank you for sharing. And we do like to start with this question because it does tie into this whole model. And so thank you all for sharing. And we'll continue to do that throughout the workshop. And so just a little bit more about the organization that myself and Mattea work for. So it is called the Office of Community Health and Resiliency. We are in the phases of transitioning into a center, which is super exciting. The grant that we received is funded through SAMHSA, as you all see projected on there. And so our focus is to train CHWs in culturally relevant, traumatic and chronic stress-related assessments, referrals, and direct services specific to marginalized children and families. And so how we're doing that right now is providing these workshops and trainings to CHWs both at the local level and national level in the community resiliency model. So our hopes is to extend it to other trainings. And so we're looking at that currently, but it's very exciting because our focus is with community health workers and helping recognize the profession as a whole and providing these, great opportunities to learn more about the topics of trauma and toxic stress. And so the logos that you see there are just people that we're collaborating with So the Trauma Resource Institute, which is the creator of this model, we're part of NASHWA, the National Association of Community Health Workers, which I'm sure you all are aware of. And then we are also part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which we just attended a conference. It was amazing. Again, the topic was trauma and toxic stress. So it's things that we can bring out to you all as well. So very exciting work. And just very briefly, this is kind of like the 4 goals that we have as a whole. So creating a CHW toolkit, so you all have access to these great, assessments and screenings, referral tools, all of that is being worked through. Specialized trainings like the ones you will be receiving today. Webinar series, we just hosted our very first one, which was exciting. That we'll be putting up in our website if you all are interested in learning a little bit more about it. And then lastly, develop a certificate program. We do know that the certifications for CHWs vary depending on states. So it'll be nice to be able to provide that at the national level, again, in the topics of trauma and toxic stress. And if you all have questions for me and Mattea, please put them in the chat, or we'll put our information at the very end if you're interested in reaching out to us. So we'd like to take a moment. TRI does that, or the Trauma Resource Institute provides these at the very beginnings of our workshops. And so we'd like to do the same. This land acknowledgement is through Arizona State University. And so I'll go ahead and give us maybe a minute or so to read it, and we'll proceed. All right, thank you for taking the time to acknowledge this. And so before we begin, we'd like to just set a couple community expectations, and I'll go briefly about what that looks like, but feel free to add things, Mattea and Maureen and the rest of the staff, if you'd like to add anything. But like I mentioned, for this particular model, we invite people to be interactive with us. And so we love receiving things on the chat. Definitely unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment. And so we invite you to leave your cameras on as well. If you're at a space where that doesn't allow you to be in front of or have your camera on, that's okay. But we do like to see everyone's faces and that you're interacting with us. Another thing is, if you're not speaking, we kindly ask if you put yourselves on mute, just in case there's some background noise that is preventing like the speaker to be heard. Please keep your cell phones on silent or vibrate, especially if you're not on mute. And then what is said in this group, we like to have it remained in here, especially when we touch on the subjects of trauma and these sensitive topics that we'll be going over today. So just, be mindful of that. And then if anything, if you need to step outside, use the restroom or anything like that, feel free to just turn off your camera. Anything else that I forgot or you'd like to add for these? All right, sounds great. So I'm going to hand it off to Maureen, and she will kick us off.
Great, thank you, Bianca. So we're going to start with the first key concept, which really is, what is CRIM? What is Community Resiliency Model? So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. So one thing that's really great about CRIM is that it really can be used by anyone. So it can be used across the lifespan, all different ages. In my training, we talked about people as young as 3 learning CRIM skills and people as old as 100. So it does work with different ages. It can also be used across cultures. So that's another really beautiful thing, is to see how people take the concepts from CRIM and make them work with their cultures and traditions. And it can also be used by people with different abilities, people with different literacy levels, different abilities or disabilities. It really is quite a flexible model. And so what do we use it for? We use it for the activities of daily living that can cause us stress. As we know, regardless, we all come to the table with our own lived experiences. But even in the best case of scenarios, we encounter a lot of stress in our life. And that has implications on our mental health and on our bodies. So CRIM is a tool to help cope with that stress, manage that stress, and still show up as our best selves. Another great thing about CRIM is that it does not require a licensed mental health professional. And that's important for a couple of reasons. For some of us, some folks have had damaging encounters with mental health providers, so they may not want to utilize them. And for others of us, there can be really long wait lists, right? There's a shortage of mental health providers, so we don't always have access to that. So CRIM is really great because it is a skill that we can do ourselves and that we can also share with the people that we love. So I feel like it's really powerful. Next slide, please. So basically, what is CRIM and what does it do? It really teaches you or invites you how to notice what you are feeling and what you are sensing within your body, and then gives you the tools to help shift or lean into sensations that are more pleasant. So you're going to hear us a lot during the presentation using sensation words. And for some of y'all, you might already have good understanding of your nervous system and the sensations that you experience. But for other people, like for myself, I had really learned to ignore sensations as a coping mechanism. So it took me a while to really stop talking in thinking words and feeling words, emotion words, and really focus on the sensations of what was going on inside my body. And that's where CRIM's focus is. It is a scientific model that's based on knowledge of the nervous system and our sensations. So basically, we're going to talk later about tracking and how to understand those sensations. But once we do that, we really then have the ability to kind of lean into sensations that are pleasant or at least neutral, and that helps us to better function as our best selves. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned in the beginning, there are 6 skills for CRIM, but we only have 2 hours today, and we're going to really just talk about 3. And the basic 3 are tracking, resourcing, and grounding. Today, I think we're going to be talking about tracking, resourcing, and help now. But there's also shift and stay and gesturing. I would say that really the core skill of CRIM is tracking, because you really have to be able to notice what's going on, what sensations you're experiencing, and then from there you can use some of the other skills to change those sensations. So this is what really kind of sets CRIM apart from other wellness models, is that tracking. It really is foundational. And I like to think of it as really like an invitation to get to know your nervous system and kind of take some power back within your nervous system and regulating it. And lastly, part of what CRIM teaches is that we have innate resiliency, right? We have the power to heal. So just as trauma and stress impacts us, so too does our resiliency and our healing. So that's a really great part of it. Next slide, please. And so a community resiliency model guide That's what hopefully you all will be after you complete this course. The idea behind CRIM is you start with yourself, right? You learn it yourself, you practice with yourself, but then we want you to share it with others. It is a community resiliency model, so it's not just about the individual, it's meant to be shared throughout the community and with the people that you love. So basically, we want to just take you through the basics today, and then we definitely encourage you to bring that back to whatever your community is and share it. Next slide, please. And then I also want to talk about the fact that we have this session today and we're going to go over 3 of the skills, but there are 3 more, and this is something that we hope that you are going to implement into your day-to-day life. So one way to do that is to check out the iChill app. It is a free app that you can get in the App Store on your phone. If you're not a cell phone person, or if you're like me and you have no storage space left on your cell phone for any more apps, you can also go on your computer to ichillapp.com. And it provides a really great overview of CRIM, the different skills. There's a really wonderful grounding exercise on there where the person leading you through it has the most calming, wonderful voice that it almost puts you to sleep. So we definitely want to share that with you because it's a great way to kind of keep working on your CRIM skills. Next slide. Now throw it over to my colleague.
Perfect. Thanks, Maureen. So our second key concept is going to be the resilient zone. And so kind of before we move forward into the concept itself, we're going to talk about things like the resilient zone and tracking and grounding, and they all have fancy names. But a lot of this, you might know already, or you might have sensed or felt in your body before, and we're going to talk about it. And it's like, that looks familiar. So I just want to put that out there that, one of the reasons we have labels for everything is to help us build a common language so that we can actually talk about our nervous systems and talk about our wellness. So if any of this looks familiar, then that's great. It means you already have pieces of wellness in your body, and we can really work to promote those. So before we talk about the zone itself, first we want to just ask, what is resiliency? And so resiliency can mean a lot of different things to everybody. And so I invite you to come off mute or put in the chat how you personally define resilience or resiliency. Not just surviving, but thriving.
Resiliency to me is overcoming obstacles that normally you don't confront.
Mm-hmm.
It could be physically and sometimes mentally. So it's just happenings or occurrences that don't normally happen in your life, but you have the will and the strength to overcome them.
Absolutely. Well put, Ray. Thank you.
So in the chat, Nita says being able to come back from a setback. Dr. V says the ability to bounce back from adversity with wellness and sustainability as the focal. Sheila says the ability to bounce back from a traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
Mattea, I wondered if I could share something just real quick.
Please do.
I want to preface this by saying that, we are going to be talking about building resiliency, and resiliency is a good thing. But I always just like to tell people that we are not saying that you should be traumatized and it's just your job to get over it, right? Lots of things happen that should not happen. So I know sometimes people are like, I'm tired of people telling me to be resilient. Like, I want people in my life to treat me better. So we're saying 2 things at the same time, right? CRIM skills, learn these skills, have these tools, but also do other things such as, address issues, systemic issues in society, and, set up healthy boundaries with the people in your lives. So I just wanted to make that, point that we're not trying to normalize and say that people, should be exposed to trauma, but unfortunately, many of us are.
Thank you, Maureen, for adding that. And that's one of the reasons we ask, what is your definition of resiliency and what's it mean to you? Because for some people, it does have a lot of negative connotations. And I think one of the things that TRI often includes in their presentations is when they were doing a training in Northern Ireland and they were talking about resiliency, like it was this great thing. And one of the audience members brought up that there's this billboard in the town where they were doing the training. And it's like, telling me that I'm resilient just means that you can keep doing more horrible things to me, and it like gives you an excuse. And so that's not the definition of resiliency that we're working with today, but we acknowledge that, it has some different connotations sometimes. So please keep that in mind. So thank you, Maureen, for adding that.
I'd also like to say that resiliency, in my opinion, is taking what happens to you and turning around and making it work for you.
Yeah, that's another great way of putting it, because a lot of times those things are out of our control. And so that's our hope with these skills is whatever happens, we can stay in our zone and kind of handle life as it comes at us. So thank you all. So for the purposes of today and for this model, kind of the shared definition that we're going to use, acknowledging that there are other definitions out there, is saying that resilience is the ability to cope with stressful life situations in a healthy manner, as well as to bounce back from those. And it is a process, and it's a process and a skill that can be strengthened through practice. You aren't just born with or without resiliency, and that's life. It's strengthened through practice. And one of the ways to practice that is through using these skills. So now to actually talk about the zone itself. The resilient zone, when you're in it, you're really in a state of well-being in mind, body, and spirit. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy. You can experience a lot of different emotions and sensations when you're in the okay zone, but it means that we can really handle those life stressors or those traumatic experiences as they come at us. And you'll see that the resilient zone, there's a wave inside of it, right? We're not stagnant. We don't just stick at one spot. There's natural flow up and down inside the resilient zone, and that's perfectly normal. And so, as I said, you don't have to be happy to be in the resilient zone. And we also call it the okay zone, which I think is helpful when explaining this particular piece of it, that, you can be angry, but you're okay. And you can be really, really sad, but I'm still okay. And so that feeling of not being completely overwhelmed by these feelings of sadness or, exhaustion, happiness, fear, if you don't feel overwhelmed by it and you can notice the sensations associated with it and bring your attention to the more pleasant sensations, then you really are in your okay zone because you're handling it. And so our goal with this model and with practicing these skills is to widen our resilient zone. So sometimes, we have that pretty little wave inside the resilient zone, but sometimes life happens. We've got that lightning bolt, the dramatic lightning bolt that you see on the slide. And so maybe that's a stressful event, maybe it's a traumatic event, or a reminder of a previous stressful or traumatic event. And so instead of that pretty little wave, we might get a little jagged and we're up in our high zone and we're out down in our low zone. And so our goal is to really just not get stuck in either of those high or low zones. And so what I mean by the high zone, that is going to be a really activated state in our body and in our nervous system. And so maybe you're experiencing some edginess or irritability. Maybe you're feeling a little bit manic or feeling a lot of pain. So you're very activated in your nervous system. And then the opposite, if you're in your low zone, that's a very deactivated state, but deactivated in an unpleasant sense. So feeling depression or sadness, maybe isolation, exhaustion, or just not feeling anything at all. So some numbness. So that's what the low zone might be like. So raise your virtual or your actual hand if at some point in your life you've been in one of these. I'm going to put mine real high up because I definitely have been in both. Sometimes at the same time, you never know what's going on. Perfect. Yeah. So as you can see from all the hands around
right
you.
now? Are we taking questions? Because we have some hands up. Just wondering.
Yeah, no, we can take questions whenever. I also asked people to raise their hand to indicate that. So if those were question hands, please come off mute and answer your question. Thank you, Candace. All right, so that's the high and low zone. Our goal is to really if we get out of our zone of resiliency, we can use the skills to come back. And that's the goal of this model. All right, so I also mentioned that one of the goals of this model is to widen your resilience zone. So what I mean by that, we have some images on the slide, but I'm going to give like a real life example, so to speak. So some people are coffee drinkers, right? And they like need coffee to handle the day, right? So for example, a coffee drinker, when they get up in the morning, if they aren't able to have their coffee, they might start their day with a really narrow resilience zone. They might be pretty irritable. Maybe all it takes is like losing their keys before they leave for work, and they're like totally up in their high zone. They're mad. They're noticing a lot of pain in their body, and they just can't handle it. So that might be an example of a narrow resilience zone. It takes just something little and we're stuck. We're stuck out of our okay zone. Whereas if that person had their coffee, maybe they did a little meditation before work, you know, whatever is part of their wellness practice. And then they lose their keys, but they find them because they can handle it. And then they get in their car and they're stuck in traffic, and it's, you know, it's annoying, but they're cool. They can handle it and they make it to work okay. That might be an example of a slightly wider resilience zone. More stuff can be thrown at us, whether it's traffic or an issue at work or, you know, a fight with your partner at home. We can handle those things because we're using our wellness skills and we're able to notice that we're in our resilience zone. So resilient zones come in all different shapes and sizes, just like nervous systems and just like people, and it changes throughout life. And in the coffee example, it can change throughout the day, right? And so this language just really helps us talk about our wellness and whether we're in or out of our zone at any given moment. So speaking of noticing which zone we're in, one of the first kind of key concepts of CREM and the beginning of the skills is just noticing where you are right now. So I invite you all to notice whether you are in your resilient zone or not. And if you are in your zone, where in your zone are you? You kind of up towards the edge, maybe towards the bottom. And if you feel comfortable sharing, then I invite you to put that in the chat, or you can come off mute and share. Another option, since we're on Zoom, if you want to get fancy, up at the top, you should see a little notification that says you're viewing Bianca's screen, and you can click view options and annotate. And you can select a little stamp or something, and you can put that on the chart wherever you are.
Well, right now, something unexpected just happened. Out of the clear blue sky, a moving company truck was in front of my house and suddenly just loudly knocked on my door, which, you know, I was unexpecting. And so I guess my blood pressure just went up because I wasn't expecting that. And so they're still sitting up front. But again, those are the things that just occur unexpectedly. Most likely they probably have the wrong address, but I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ray. And clearly you're already well on your way to learning how to track, which we'll talk more about later. But you noticed the physical sensations, the blood pressure that were associated with that knock. And hopefully, you know, when we talk more about the skills later in this little session, we can help you get back in your resilience zone with some of those skills. So thank you for sharing, Ray. Knocks on my door always stress me out because I never plan for anyone to come over. Seeing a question, I think someone's got their hand up.
Yeah, I have my hand up. My name is Janelle Bennett, and I came, I'm sorry, I apologize. I had another meeting I was coming out of, so I missed a little bit of the beginning. But in terms of the resilient zones, like mine is this blue arrow here. So does that mean like you're low in your resiliency if it, depending on where we place it? Could you say, where are you within that zone? So it's high, like we're good, medium, and low is like, I'm not so good.
So the high and the low zone are both places we don't want to get stuck. So it's not like a 0 to 10 and 10 is good. That center is really that, you know, that centered place where we're not feeling a lot of pain, but we're also not experiencing like exhaustion and numbness and depression. And so that center place is where we're really okay. And the center can be anywhere in the resilient zone. Putting it like up or down within that zone is just noticing, like I put my heart towards the top because I'm definitely in my okay zone, but I'm pretty energetic and I'm excited about the day. And so I feel like I'm more towards the top, like I'm more activated, but I still feel okay and good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Jenny. And thank you for those who annotated. I see some dots and some stickers. I see a star pretty way down low. So I hope that some of these skills later today will help bring you a little bit up if that's what you need today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clear my own drawing. Maureen, I think as host, you might need to clear all the annotations so that they don't show up on the future slides.
Can you explain to me how to do that?
Yes, apologies for not practicing that earlier. So if you go up to view options and click annotate, there's a little trash can that says clear, and you can choose clearing all the annotations.
You said view.
View options up at the very top. If you want to also make me co-host, I can remove them for you.
Yeah, let me just do that because
Okay.
I'm struggling a little bit here. So let me make you co-host.
No worries. Thank you all for the patience as we pause. And I see your comment, Venancia, that your star went a little bit awry. So that's okay. Life goes awry sometimes. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Bianca so that she can tell us a little more about toxic stress and trauma.
All right, thank you, Mattea. So before we get started, we always like to invite you to just asking you about the definition of toxic stress and if you've heard of it. So I'm assuming you all have heard, but what do you all think toxic stress is? We'll focus on toxic stress first. And feel free to put it in the chat too.
I assume that toxic stress is, it differentiates from, I'm not sure if there's a normal stress, but toxic, of course, means harmful. So that type of stress to me seems that for some reason, an individual is stuck with that harmful stress to the point that it starts affecting his health or her health. Unlike normal stress where an occurrence occurs, like right now that it occurred to me and I got a little stressed, but it was resolved and now I'm back to norm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that was beautiful, actually. That was great. Anyone else like to share before we get started? All right. Well, like Ray was mentioning, so the really cool thing about CREM is that they describe it to you in a spectrum. So I like where you were going, Ray, because you honestly like hit it on the nail. So as you all see the spectrum, right? So Ray was talking about like normal stress, like what is that, right? So there's obviously two ends to the spectrum. We have a positive stress, and we'll talk about examples. And then at the very, for me is my left, is the toxic stress, right? So the term toxic stress is used to describe kind of like, well, this spectrum as a whole, right? It's tolerable stress that we're able to be in our okay zone and still function, right? And since you've already heard about the resilient zone and the okay zone. So an example, we'll start with positive stress. An example of positive stress is like speaking in public, like you're freaking out, you're about to present, there's like a lot of audiences and you're stressed about like messing up or that you might say something wrong. So that would be an example of positive stress. And so when you experience positive stress, CREM describes it as a response to like moderate stressors, and they're time limited, so they don't like continue on. They don't stay there. It's just kind of like a temporary phase. And it's like an increase in heart rate, right? Like when you're about to speak in public, at least for me, I still, even though I train, it's still something that I like experience. And so when we move on to toxic stress, which is the complete opposite, and how does that like turn into toxic stress, right? So when we start noticing maybe that the stress is like it's staying in our body, it's a little bit prolonged, we're noticing things in our system or nervous system that just like stays there. It's like a constant thing. So when we start noticing that, that is when it like it turns into the toxic stress. And an example of that could be, people going through a divorce. It could be something that you've experienced, for example, in a situation that someone is not being very pleasant in your life, or just however that looks like. The toxic stress definition would be that something that just stays in your body and it doesn't really transition into anything else. It's just there. And so I had a question one time when we were doing a workshop from a CHW, and they asked, can positive stress turn into toxic stress? And it was really interesting because we've never been asked that. So I wanted to ask you all that, if you all think positive stress can turn into toxic stress.
I will share that I think it can, and I see that Bianca is agreeing in the chat. I think that sometimes a small amount of stress that like motivates us and like we're energized and like we've got these things to do, but like if it becomes too much and if it becomes ongoing, the expression that's like when someone says I'm running on adrenaline, if you start running on adrenaline for weeks and months, you're in this constant activated state in your body that is toxic and not healthy. So I do think it could migrate over and become that, especially if you don't have the tools to cope with it.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Maureen. And I think just going back to that, when we do get to that phase and we start noticing these like sensations in our body that are not that pleasant, that's when it could be turned into like an actual trauma, which we're going to talk into next. So trauma is the emotional and like psychological and physiological residue left over from heightened levels of toxic stress. So that's when, it just stays there, right? And we're experiencing these unpleasant sensations, and we feel that when we encounter something, it's frequent, it doesn't leave, and we're just dealing with it. And so the perception of it is key, because obviously something that could happen to me and our colleague, Mattea, we might take it differently, right? So we like to point that out because people can experience the same situation but deal with it in a different way. And so we like to say that perception is key in trauma, and it indicates, even like I said, multiple people having the same experience, and one can perceive it as like life-threatening and it's toxic stress and it turns into trauma, versus the other one, just deals with it in a separate way. So anything that you all like to add to the definition, or something that's missing? All right. And so for here, we like to give, examples of toxic stress and how it could lead into trauma, right? And so these are obviously just a very short list, but we invite you all to take a look at it. And if you have any comments or questions, these are just, life experiences that we as humans might experience in our lifetime, and, it leads into a trauma. I had a question before during a workshop, and they asked let me see if I can find it. Oh, they asked for ageism. Does everybody understand what that means? Because it could go both ways. You could be discriminated for being too young and maybe perceived as you don't know anything, or it could be the opposite. It could be that you're discriminated against being elderly and that you aren't, strong enough to work, for example. So that's kind of an example of ageism, but I know I was asked that in their previous workshop, so I just want to clear that out. Anything that stands out?
Go ahead, Janelle. I see your hand is up.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, one, I want to say this is really good examples to help people to realize some traumas they may have faced or stressors they may have faced, not even realizing it. But something I was thinking, a question to maybe something to be added on here is like loneliness and isolation, especially now since the pandemic, but also even pre-pandemic, it was already an epidemic, loneliness and isolation. So I was just thinking maybe that could be added. And then I work primarily with older adults. And so I know a lot of times just learning how to adjust to being older and like your bodily changes, family dynamics change, needing, shifting from being like the one that was independent to now you're the dependent, like those type of things. Would that fit into here? Is there a way we could add that on here?
Yeah, no, I love those examples, and we can definitely add them to the list. And that's why we like to invite you all to think about it. And if there's anything missing, please bring it forth, because especially for those going through that specifically. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely take that into note. And so as we transition into learning about how to read our bodies and learn to speak. Oh, does someone have a question? Oh, okay. So as we transition to learning about how to read our body and to use sensation words, here are some common reactions to stress, right? We're all human, we go through things happen to us. And so these are just, again, a very short and brief list of how we react to the stress that happens in our lives. So please take a moment to read and go through the list. And so we like to put this for you all as well, just so you can see that again, that we're all human and that life isn't, roses all the time, and that it's just something that we do. It's how we react. It's how our biology is put together. So I really like the comment that Maureen said about resiliency. This kind of ties into that how we react and doesn't put us in a place of like being helpless or in a space of like being weak, right? This is how we react as humans. And the really cool thing about CREM is that they normalize that. And that, so again, please read through this. And it's kind of a space for us to kind of come together and, I don't know, just knowing the fact that we all react to these things when something happens. And so for this portion of the presentation, we'd like to include this study because there's actual research behind everything. So have you all heard about the ACEs study? If not, it's a great study that was done. And we like to put this because it does tie into how a stressful event or a life experience can impact us like in the long run, right? If we don't attend to it. So ACEs was a study that was put together years ago. And I think they were able to have a pool of like 17,000 patients, and it was in the healthcare system. And so the point of this was to investigate the lifelong health and social effects of adverse childhood experiences. So it was folks that went through things as when they were a child and how it like impacted them as an adult. So there's 3 types of ACEs or the scores. And so number 1 would be a household. So people that went through troubles in their family, growing up. Number 2 is community. So people that grew up in a living space or an area with very concentrated violence. They were around it a lot. And the 3rd one, I don't think I have it here. Oh, actually I do. It's an environmental. So people that have experienced natural disasters. Unfortunately, right now, Florida is going through something pretty rough. And so it's just these things that happen as kids that if you don't attend to it, this study shows that it could lead to health problems. And so it's really interesting, right? We would never think that would lead into something with health related, but it is. And so there's research around it, and there's a lot of terms here in this picture. So we like to show it to you all, especially if you've gone through anything like this and you want to, learn a little bit more about that and how if that's affecting you, then yeah, it's a really great tool. Any questions on the study?
I have I think this very interesting, the one with the tree, because of course that mostly stems from your upbringing, your surroundings with family and so forth. And the reason I bring that up is because one of my grandsons, who's very sociable, we come from a very sociable Italian family. So he was homeschooled for the last 2 years because, of course, the pandemic. And this was his first year to go to school. So he was very excited. He was riding the bus back and forth. And recently, like about 3 weeks ago, everybody got a bracelet. And of course, because he comes from our background, he's always saying hello, how you doing? So always greeting individuals, and he was greeting these 6th graders. Well, what happened was these 6th graders, while they were waiting for the bus after school, they ended up picking him up and breaking his bracelets that were given to each kids in the school and just throwing them around while they were waiting. And it made me wonder what a 6th grader thinks to be doing that to a 2nd grader. And then I started reflecting, well, it all depends where he or she, stems from their family. Luckily my grandson, it didn't affect him. My daughter and my son-in-law, they talked to him. So, but it saddens me that 6th graders will even go to that extreme.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, a lot of the times it's tied back to the environment, right, that they're a part of. And if it's something that happens, or maybe like a coping mechanism for them to act like and I don't want to say bully, that's a very strong term, but yeah, putting themselves in that position to harm those that are a little bit weaker, right? But yeah, good example, Ray. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else would you like to share a comment or a question on this? And again, it's just as a reminder to just the importance of attending to, past histories, right? If we've gone through something and that the study shows that it could lead to, health problems later.
Hello.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is Teresa. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Advocate at Home Hospice. I just wanted to piggytail on what the gentleman just stated. I think sometimes it's not so much, I don't know the children involved, but I'm thinking that sometimes it may be they act out or do things that they normally wouldn't do just because they're around other peers that are doing it also. So you may have a few of the children that know it's wrong to do those things, but because they want to fit in with their peers, they go ahead and do it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. There's so many factors, right, to it. And you're right. It could be just friends. And I think at that age, obviously, we put a lot of importance to the friendships that we have in our lives, right? And so that could definitely be one of the factors, like just trying to fit into that group, or I don't know, trying to show off in front of their friends. Like, that's definitely a valid factor. Thank you for sharing, Teresa. And so as we transition, so we like to explain to you all how ACEs and CREM connect, right? So CREM addresses toxic stress and trauma to prevent or alleviate stress's impact on our bodies. And CREM can be considered, and that's why we like to use this little picture of vitamins, because CREM is equivalent to living a healthy lifestyle, and that could look like eating healthy, making healthy choices when with nutrition. It could be like taking a daily vitamin, exercising, good sleep, good hygiene. And so the model, it primes our natural resiliency, and it gives us a greater access to our innate ability to recover and adapt. Not to mention, that going back to what we like to emphasize, that the resiliency part, right? And so that you're not expected to do that, and it's a process, right? But this model just teaches us to learn a little bit more about ourselves and how our body works and how we respond to things. And so, yeah, it could be thought of taking a daily vitamin. Once you learn these skills, we hope you're able to do that. And so here are some examples of some post-traumatic resiliency common reactions. So going back to how we're all human and how we're set up in our biological system, nervous system, and how that is just something that we all have in common. So these are just a small list, again, of ways us humans react to the trauma after it happens, right? So we have resilience, we have strength and courage, a renewed relationship, gratitude, advocating, and appreciation for the loved ones, forgiveness, and so on. And so is there anything on the list that you all would like to share or add?
I would like to add just fun, like making sure you do things for fun, enjoyment, as well as stillness. I don't think that's on here, but I found it helps me to be more resilient, just able to move forward throughout the day. If I have moments of just doing nothing, I just sit and I'm just still.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love how during there's obviously negative and positives of the pandemic, but something that I noticed is that they normalize that a little bit more, like just not doing anything, which is okay sometimes. Like we gotta stop sometimes, right? Because life can get crazy. So thank you for sharing that. I love that. And again, it's just, a reminder that resilience is natural within us and all of us, and often can be transformative, right? And both emotional and spiritual change can be experienced during this phase. And, CREM just helps us kind of enhance and provides like that greater access, right? Again, to learning how to read our own bodies and bring out that natural resilience that we have.
Seeing a question from Sheila. Would you like to come off mute and share?
Hi, everybody. I thought nutrition could be an item that we put on this post-traumatic resiliency list, because I've recently noticed that food, my body reacts to food, and being in the health industry, I have learned that 80% of what we put in our bodies, it really makes a difference on our mood, our physical health, how our brain respond, how we respond to trauma, or these kinds of things. And so I think nutrition is huge. And our bodies do react to the food as it digests and it goes into our blood system, and nutrition is key. And maybe I'm not saying it the way I should say it, but nutrition really does matter, and what we put inside. I noticed that my body reacts to certain foods. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. It affects my vision sometimes. If I eat something that's not whole, if it's not whole food and it might have a preservative or something in it, it might make my vision blur for a little while until it passes through my system. And these are things that I think we should definitely, nutrition is important. So I hope you guys understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you, Sheila. And thank you for bringing that like healthcare perspective too. That's super important. I personally can't like speak to that, but just because of my background, but I love how you're able to talk about that. And that's definitely one of the things that we could add on here, because it is, we've all been there. Like when you eat junk food, you just kind of feel sluggish and a little bit slower and not that much energy. And when I've noticed it within myself too. Every time I do that switch, right, that I'm eating, making better choices, healthier choices, it's such a difference. So yeah, no, thank you for that. That could definitely be added on here.
I think that is very important to nutrition, especially in today's life where a lot of our entertainment is indoors. We have all Netflix and our laptops, so we have a tendency of not being more outside as we were probably 2-3 decades ago. And then of course, like those of us that live in the Midwest, when winter comes, that makes us stay inside longer. So I think what we eat, we don't or aren't able to burn it out as much as we used to. Of course, that comprises with our age. But even without our age, decades ago, we were more active, less entertainment indoors.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with that comment about how that shifted a little bit, like that time outside. I know I was a 90s kid and I have scars in my knees from the times that I would like climb into trees. It's definitely a different culture now. So bringing up that nutrition, bringing up the physical exercise outside, it's so important now, especially with all these like texts and tablets and everyone's just so distracted with media, social media. So that's really great that you guys are bringing this input. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And so before we practice our very first wellness skill, we'd like to talk about this perspective shift. And that's kind of the whole point of the CREM model, is to start like shifting us into a different perspective of how we think about trauma, right? And so these are what we can start off with, the very conventional one, which is the very first one, the one in yellow. And how we typically ask when something happens is like, we ask what's wrong with you, right? And so that question just like kind of leads to us being in like bringing or back to like that space of not feeling pleasant and kind of even re-triggering, right? Because they're asking you like, what's wrong with you? And you just kind of go back to that thinking of like, oh, well, this happened. And so it just kind of triggering, right? And so the next one is a trauma-informed perspective, which is when we start asking like, what happened to you? And asking like the actual event, right? And so that's a little bit, I'm assuming I'm not a clinical, I don't have a clinical background, but I'm assuming it's the space where we're able to actually ask the person, right, like about the event that they went through, versus the last one, the resiliency informed shift or perspective, is when we start thinking about the person and their strengths, right? And so not to say that what happened should not be validated and should not be attended to, but it's a space where we're able to ask the person about what's actually right about you. What are your strengths? And there's such a difference when you do that. And so CREM, as we've been mentioning, is shifting into that resiliency informed perspective, does help us in the way of like learning how we could come about a situation and respond to it in a correct way. So it doesn't necessarily mean that what we went through is should not be validated. Like I said, if you need help, definitely get professional help, but it's just a different way of assessing the situation, right? And it's asking what is actually right about you. Does anyone have any questions on these different perspectives? Any comments you'd like to add? Even if you've tried this with your own practice or the people that you all work with.
I'll just share, Bianca. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to share, Ray?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I feel like the conventional approach almost blames people. You know, it's kind of like a victim blaming. Whereas I think trauma informed, we hear a lot about that today in our work, trying to like build programs and services always through the lens of acknowledging that people may have gone through trauma and kind of being cognizant of that and trying to create a safe space, which is great. But the resiliency informed is also saying someone may have been traumatized by something, they may have gone through it. We should be cognizant of that, but they also bring a lot of strength. They are not their trauma. They have other things that are also great that are going on at the same time. So I really like that positive. Two things can be true at the same time. You can be wounded and very strong.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Maureen. And my background is in education, so I've worked with youth a lot. And so it makes me really sad when teachers don't like bring this into the classroom, because all students come with strengths. They all have this, like, I don't know, just something great about them. And if teachers recognize that a little bit more, sometimes I think it would be different, right? So social emotional, super important.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is related, but I used to coach all my daughters in basketball years ago. They're growing up now. And I was always a believer that if you came to practice and of course you did what you had to do as a team, everybody would play. You know, I wasn't one of those coaches that if you weren't athletic and you didn't have the skills, you were not going to play. Because I was the believer that the more you played, the more you learned, because you would take that into life, you know, to overcome the obstacles of that game. And I had this little girl. She would always come to practice on time. Always be asking me what should she work on. And she wasn't my most skilled individual, but I had a great team or teams for those 15, 20 years. And one time she was playing and she got fouled. And of course, I called a timeout and I got all the girls around and I looked at her and I said, Maricel, after you make the free throw, and I looked at everybody else, this is what we're going to do. And of course she was shocked because what? I'm going to make a free throw? But I wanted to take the stress away from her, not think about it. And I told her, you do what you got to do as you do in practice. Okay, Maricel, remember, after you make the free throw, and sure enough, she went to the free throw line. She did her routine because everybody had their routine and she made it. Wow. And the face and her covering her face and just running and looking at me, I'll always remember that. And the little girl, you know, that as Maureen said, it's just wonderful to watch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a great example, right? Thank you for sharing. Yeah, as coaches too, right? You know, good coaches recognize that, and they, regardless of everybody's abilities, right? It's just the fact that you're there for them and that you recognize that they can and that they're able to. Everyone's able to. So that's really That's amazing. Anybody else? All right. So I will turn it to Maureen, and you will be able to practice your first wellness skill.
Yes, so we're going to introduce the first skill, and these skills can be introduced in any order. As we talked about, tracking is really foundational, but we wanted to start with help now, reset now, because I like to think of this one as one of the most immediate tools. So like if you feel yourself getting bumped out of your zone, whether that's through unpleasant sensations, like you feel your heart is racing, your temperature is going up, or if it's just more an emotional, like I'm upset, I'm not doing well today, like I'm very overwhelmed. Help Now is kind of a very quick, immediate way to reset your nervous system and move towards more pleasant sensations. So our nervous system also kind of will reset naturally. In my CRIM training, I learned about how yawns are a natural nervous system reset, and that really appealed to me because I'm a big loud yawner. So now when I yawn, I say it's just I have to reset my nervous system. But so Help Now is some real quick ways to kind of draw your attention away from a negative sensation and move towards a positive one. Next slide. So again, these are some examples and we're going to go through them, but things like listening to sounds in your environment, counting backwards from 10. I really love touching a surface, and I found that for me, it doesn't really matter what the surface is, but just focusing on how it feels takes me away from the bad sensation that I'm experiencing. So it's a real shift in focus. Also, pushing against a wall can kind of, you're using your muscles and you're kind of getting some of that sensation out externally, as well as really noticing your surroundings. So one quick thing, if someone is really activated, you can say, quick, tell me what colors you see. Name 5 colors in your environment. And that sort of gets them thinking about that task. Also feeling the temperature, taking a walk and really noticing how your feet feel touching the ground and kind of feeling the environment, the wind, the temperature. All these things are examples of Help Now. And they sound really simple, but as we go through them, sometimes it requires also a little bit of intention. So next slide, please. So again, using CRIM, I think you can actually go to the next slide. Using CRIM is a choice. So we invite you, if you would like to practice any of these Help Now skills with us, you can, but you do not have to. It's just an invitation. So next slide. So as I talked about, listen to the sounds. So kind of taking a moment to listen and hear what's going on in your environment. This one I think is probably, for me personally, not my favorite one because I'm a deaf person and sometimes I don't experience sounds as pleasantly as other people do. But one thing is like listening to the wind, listening, are there birds chirping, like what is going on around you is a way to kind of get out from the sensations that are going on inside. Next slide. Count backwards from 10. I feel like this is one that I have used with kids. When you get upset, like it's just something to draw the attention away and like take a moment, just take a moment and step outside yourself. So counting backwards from 10 can be helpful. Touching a surface is the one I love. I do this all the time when I'm in meetings and I feel that I'm getting bumped out of my zone. Right now, y'all can't see, but I'm putting my hands on my desk and I'm touching that surface and I'm feeling how smooth it is. And I'm pushing down a little bit. And so again, I'm taking some of my built up activation and energy from inside and I'm putting it into this smooth desk. So that's an example. Again, similarly, pushing against a wall or something solid. You could be doing this with your hands. You could also lean against a wall. and kind of feel how it feels on your back or on another part of your body. Next slide. And then noticing your surroundings. I feel like this one goes really hand in hand with that quick name 5 colors. And I really like this one because sometimes we get so tied into our struggles, maybe the stress and the sensations that go along with that, that we're like tunnel vision. Like I'm upset, my blood pressure has gone up, I'm feeling activated. It's like, I might not even notice all the good things that are going on around me, especially if you're outside. Noticing your surroundings can be very calming. Next slide. Go for a walk or move your body. And I want to stress that this doesn't have to be a beautiful movement. Some of us are great dancers, and dancing might be great, but sometimes you need to like shake it out, you know, or even, I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but sometimes I will have like a shudder run through my body. And it's like, that is a nervous system reset. You're getting some of those bad sensations out. That's another one I feel like we use with kids a lot, like shake out the stress. And you will just flap your arms and shake it out and focus on the way that your arms are feeling as you do that. So these are all just ways to kind of draw your attention out of that unpleasant sensation. Next slide. I also really love this one. Again, many of these things sound super simple. And when I first heard of drink a glass of water or juice as a help now, I was like, I have to really think about this because I'm the type of person who always has a drink. I can skip a meal, but I can never skip satisfying my thirst. So I always have water or coffee or something. I was like, well, many times I'm drinking my beverage and I'm still feeling activated. But this one I found really helps if I put a little intention behind it. So I really enjoy water when it's ice cold. So if I have like my bottle here that keeps it cold with like 15 ice cubes, and not to keep doing what I'm doing and just drink my water, but to stop and to really take a sip, a deep sip, and focus on how that cold water feels going down my throat and how refreshing that is. So sometimes just that little focus shift of really leaning into the very simple thing that you're doing can make all the difference. Next slide. So this one, if anyone would like to participate in this, if you feel comfortable, feel free to put in the chat, tell us, you know, name 6 colors around us. Tell us which one of these help now skills appeals to you. Are you a shake it out type of person? Are you a pay attention to sounds, take a drink of water? Definitely encourage you to share. I will say that right now, naming 6 colors around me is pretty easy because I actually have some highlighters on my desk. So I see green and pink, but I'm also noticing the wall in my room is a very pale purple. And then I'm noticing a real brightly colored yellow sticker that I have on my wall. So those are just some examples. And I will say that we have some people in the chat. Sheila says she likes shake it out. That movement, I think, is a really good one because it's so physical. Also feeling the temperature. Again, some of us are in Chicago. Sometimes feeling the temperature does more harm than good. Right now we're in a sweet spot where we're adjusting to the cooler weather, but it's not frigid yet. I also think sometimes I really love the sun. So sometimes just taking a moment to step on the porch and feel the sun on my face and kind of that warmth can be really, it kind of makes me feel secure and it makes me feel just better. So those are some examples. Next slide. Are we gonna do the 5-minute break? How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Yeah, let's go
Okay,
ahead and take a 5-minute break.
5-minute break. I know some of us are in different places. Here in Chicago, it's about 1:19. So we will come back at 1:24. or 24 after the hour if you are in a different time zone.
Yeah, and feel free to grab a snack, something to drink, use the restroom, and then we'll continue with the second part.
All right, next up, we've got a couple of key concepts for you and another skill. So first, we have key concept 4, why a biological model. So we mentioned earlier that the community resiliency model is a biological model, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by that and also why we talk about it in this way. So the main concept, and you might hear us mention this a couple of times, is when we talk about the way our body reacts to stress and trauma, we're really emphasizing that it is our biology. A lot of the reactions that we have are based in our physical bodies and have evolved over time, often to protect us. And so many times it's a very elegant design of our body that leads us to react in certain ways. And sometimes it's not convenient, but it did develop for a reason. And so it's not about our mental weakness or like lack of, mental strength or fortitude like people talk about. It's really just our biology responding. And so there are universal biological reactions that happen in our body, and we share them with people all around the world. And so it's important to remember that as we talk about this. There are also natural rhythms in our body, in our sensations, in our nervous system. Much like we saw in the sort of like up and down wave in the resilient zone, it's natural to change. And just like the seasons change, so do our sensations. And so our goal is to really not get stuck in anything. And typically, even if we are a little bit stuck with time, things can change. And so it helps us to not be trapped by the storms of our body, the storms of sadness, the storms of fear, whatever the storms are containing. Our goal is to not get trapped there. And instead, we can lean into that shift and that movement and draw our attention instead to sensations of well-being so that we can transform our experience. And so two of the key concepts about the scientific research about the brain and kind of what we're learning. And again, this is all going to be kind of simplified way to look at the brain because there's lots of research out there and there's always new stuff coming up. But there are two concepts that research has shown exist in our brain. And one of those is neuroplasticity. And so that's just the ability of our brain to change. It's not stagnant. We don't have the same brain now that we had when we were born, which is good because we weren't able to speak and form memory when we were born. And then the other piece is neurogenesis. So not only can we change the existing pathways in our brain, but we also have the ability to create new pathways and new neurons within our brain, which these two phrases, or excuse me, not phrases, but like concepts are really the hope of our brain, that we can change the way our brain works and therefore how we experience the world. So knowing that and knowing that we can change our brain, that's a perfect segue into tracking because tracking really helps us do that. So tracking is the act of noticing or paying attention to sensations in your body at the present moment. It's really about the here and now, and it's just about reading the sensations. And so we've talked a lot about sensation. So as a reminder, a sensation is a physical experience in the body. So often many of us might be used to talking about feelings or thoughts. I feel pain, right? And instead, when we're talking about it here, we might say, I notice pain. I'm noticing this sensation in my body. And so thoughts and feelings all have corresponding sensations. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we talk about sensations. But kind of on our next slide, this really helps solidify that idea that emotions and feelings have corresponding sensations. So let me explain this graphic a little bit. So this was from a research study where lots and lots of people were given the shape of a body. And when told about a particular emotion or a feeling, for example, happiness, they were asked to mark on that body where they notice increased sensation or decreased sensation, as well as just where they noticed neutrality. And so this image is compiled from all of those different diagrams that people drew on the bodies and answered the questions of the researchers. They made this final image, and there was a lot of agreement among participants. And so these are really common reactions and ways to experience these emotions and feelings. And so looking at the picture, the spots where you see yellow is where people reported experiencing increased sensations. So they didn't report what exactly the sensation was, just that they were experiencing increased sensations where you see the yellow. And the blue is where they're experiencing decreased sensations. And then you have the black background is kind of just that neutral. They didn't report feeling anything out of the ordinary. So I just invite you to look at that, knowing sort of how to interpret this image and see if there's anything that you notice that sticks out to you.
Well, what I notice is that we as human beings, we need to have more love and give more love, because where the red and yellow sensations are, these are areas where we are at our best. And yeah, so, you know, I need some more love. I need to not be angry as much. You know, I need happiness. I need to be able to feel confident about myself and not have so much pride, but I need to be able to share what I know. And so I really like, this is a great illustration of, you know, what our bodies go through when we're feeling certain ways.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheila.
You're welcome.
I would like to add that I'm surprised with the figurine under love, that the legs are neutral. Speaking for myself, past experience, sometimes my legs would just be feeling like jelly, you know, when you had that love sensation. And I could not imagine myself having neutrality on my legs. I'm surprised that it's not almost equivalent to happiness.
Yeah. Well, and those feelings and emotions, right? Like, how do we even define those? They're very close, often, love and happiness. So thank you for sharing your personal experience. And again, you know, this is a compilation. So this is a start of a conversation, but this is in no way prescriptive. We're not telling you like, you can't feel anything in your legs when you feel love. Like that's, no, not at all. So thank you for pointing that out, right? Are there things that stick out to people that you notice as being interesting? All right. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to point out one thing and then we can move forward.
I do have one thing that I noticed, and that's more so of a question to make sure I understood correctly. You say like the yellow and like oranges show a more heightened sense of resiliency. Did I get that correct?
Not necessarily resiliency. That's just where people report increased sensation of any kind.
Okay, increased sensation. Okay.
Yeah.
Well then, never mind.
Okay.
I don't have a question anymore. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that clarifying question. Yeah, and that actually leads into the point that I was going to bring up is when we talk about sensations, you might have noticed we're referring to them as pleasant or unpleasant, and sometimes we'll talk about neutral sensations. And so in this graph, you know, this picture, for example, you'll notice that anger and happiness and love and anxiety, they all have high activation in the chest. But when I am feeling anxious, the sensations in my chest are not very pleasant for me in that moment. And so we just want to acknowledge that different sensations can be associated with lots of different feelings, but really how we want to think about sensations is whether they're unpleasant or pleasant for you in that moment. And we try not to assign any inherent value to the sensation. So thank you for your question, Janelle. That led very nicely into what I was going to say. So kind of how we talked about being able to build neurons and pathways and connections in our brain, one of the ways that we can do that is by paying attention to it, because what we pay attention to grows. And so let me give you a little bit of an example. If I was, had this jungle and I lived on one side of the jungle and Bianca lived on the other side of the jungle, the first time I have to go to Bianca's house, it's going to be really difficult because there isn't a path for me. I'm going to have to cut my own way through, forge a trail, and it's going to take a lot of work. But if I go to Bianca's house every day for the next year, in a year or so, even though it took me a lot of work at the beginning, in a year, I can just walk to Bianca's house and I don't have to think about anything. I can listen to the birds and enjoy my walk through the well-forested jungle, right? And that is kind of how our brain works. And so let me explain a little bit further. We have these little neurons, these little brain cells, and they communicate by creating pathways between each other. So I'm a neuron, my house is a neuron, and Bianca's house is a neuron. And so I'm working to create that pathway and to make it easier and easier to take. And so when we pay attention to sensations of well-being, we are forming that pathway, and it gets easier and easier and easier to access those sensations of well-being in our body. When typically we often notice what's causing us discomfort, those unpleasant sensations like, oh, my knee hurts. Now I'm paying attention to my knee and not anything else. And so what we encourage you to do in CREM is to shift your attention to those pleasant or neutral sensations, not the hurting knee. And that helps build those pathways in your brain instead of strengthening the pathway of pain in the knee by paying attention to it all the time. So that's what I mean by what we pay attention to grows. And that will just help you understand why we track and why this is a biologically based model. So when we track, we ask ourselves a couple of questions, or if we're leading someone else through the skills, we'll ask them these questions. But we ask, what do you notice on the inside right now? What's happening in your body? And then once we've noticed what's happening, are those sensations pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So much like with the resilient zone, we have to know where we are in order to know when and how to shift. So we're going to label those sensations based off of our current experience, and then we can shift our attention. Since this might be a little funky for people talking about sensations, it's not something we normally talk about in the day-to-day, we have some words up here that will help you to talk about sensations. So it's like a little mini dictionary on sensations. And this list is not extensive, but it's just a starting point on how to think about sensations and how to talk about them. So for example, maybe I'm noticing something in my muscles, but I don't know how to describe it. But my muscles, I might notice a tight sensation in my muscles. Maybe they're calm, maybe they're really rigid. I might describe my heart. If I notice something happening with my heart, maybe it's beating really fast, or maybe it's fluttering, and maybe that's pleasant for me. Like when I'm feeling love, I might feel a flutter in my heart, but a flutter in my heart might also be associated with anxiety. And so there's different ways to describe sensations in our body. So I just invite you to kind of look through this for a second and think about how you might describe sensations that you have experienced before. All right, so we're going to do a quick exercise so that we can practice tracking. But I want to remind everyone that, learning CREM and trying these things out and using it is a choice. So if you start doing this activity, or maybe you don't want to do it at all, that's totally okay. You can stop at any time, or you can just watch. So just a reminder that we invite you to do all of this, and you can always hit the pause button. So our activity, and I invite you, if you would like to participate, you can go ahead and come off mute if you want, or just get ready to hit that unmute button. But I invite you to take your hands, and you can either place them together, or if it's more comfortable, you can put them on your legs or on a surface. I'm going to put them together though. And I invite you to start kind of rubbing them together. Apply a little pressure so that you feel some friction between your hands. Just give them a nice rub. And then speed up a little if you're ready. And then I invite you to get faster, a little faster, and rub them as fast as you can. And then stop. And I invite you to notice what sensations you're experiencing, and feel free to just shout them out or type them in the chat, whatever you would like.
My hands are a little bit tingly.
Tingly, absolutely.
Warm.
Like friction, they're kind of warm.
Warmth, friction. Ooh, my shoulders got tense because I was like pushing really hard against my hands.
When I do it slowly, it kind of tickles in a way that I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for clarifying that was a pleasant sensation for you, Maureen. Good modeling. What are you noticing now? Maybe like I feel my hands are cooling off now that I'm not creating friction. Any other changes?
As my hands are cooling down, I think my feelings are also lowering. While I was going fast, I could feel myself, my energy just increasing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like a physical representation of maybe something we're holding, and then as we cool, our feelings go along with that. Thank you, Ray. Well, perfect. Thank you for those who participated or watched or listened. We just tracked by noticing those sensations, by talking about our tingly fingers and our warm hands. Those are all sensations, and that's tracking our body. And so we like to start with bringing those sensations to the forefront of our attention because it makes it a little bit easier to track. But when we experience more subtle sensations, or maybe we're going about our day and we're not even paying attention to the sensations, that's where the practice comes in. And it will get to the point that it's just as easy to notice those tingly and warm hands as it is to notice when you're not taking very deep breaths because maybe you're stressed out. And so we remind you to practice that. We got to work hard to build those pathways through the jungle, right? So one of the best ways to practice tracking is to do that through building a resource. So I'm going to pass it on to Maureen to talk about resourcing.
Yes, thank you, Mattea. And I also just wanted to say, when it comes to tracking, I think sometimes we have a little bit of a built-in negativity bias. Like we may be able to track when sensations are unpleasant by kind of taking the time in your day to track when you're feeling good, when things are going well, so that you can kind of recognize what good feels like and what those pleasant sensations are. So now we're going to talk about another skill that goes well, I think, with tracking is resourcing. So let's say that you are tracking and you're tracking some unpleasant sensations and you want to move away from those sensations into something more pleasant or at least neutral. A resource is one tool that you can use. So what is a resource? It can be anything that really brings you joy. So as you can see in the pictures, it could be a person, it could be an animal, your pet, your family. It could be a toy, a teddy bear, it could be a song you listen to. Sometimes it can be a memory, right? Something that maybe once existed, a moment in time when you felt really good. It also can be imagined. So when I did one of these workshops, someone talked about their resource being imagining themselves winning the lottery, which had not happened to them yet. But every time they imagined it, it helped them move towards pleasant sensation about how wonderful that would feel. So I think that's important that sometimes if you're struggling to think of like what could be a resource, it's a good idea to make a list, but keep an open mind that, you know, it doesn't have to be the traditional. Many times people say, my family is a resource. And that is valid, but there's other types of resources too. It could even be like a smell. Like sometimes people are really into incense or a scented candle, and like smelling that smell could be a resource for you. So again, they could be real, imagined, internal, or external. Next slide. And then once we've identified resources, as we use them to try and move towards more pleasant sensations, whether we're doing it with ourselves or we're trying to help someone else, access a resource. We do something called resource intensification. So it can take a little time to fully shift sensation using a resource, and asking these questions can help intensify that process. So let's say my resource is my grandmother, and imagining myself in my grandmother's kitchen growing up, and the food she would cook and the smells, that whole kind of scene is my resource. So someone might ask me, if they're trying to intensify that resource, okay, well, tell me about the smell. What does it smell like? What is she cooking? Tell me about the things you might talk about or do with your grandmother in the kitchen. And then asking questions also to go along with what that brings up inside.
I think we lost you for a second there, Maureen. The last couple of sentences, we lost your audio. Would you mind repeating?
Sorry, my internet's not so great. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. So yeah, just asking questions about that resource and also what it brings up inside. So as you think about your grandmother, as you think about those moments, what are you noticing inside in terms of sensation? So that could be anything from heart rate, temperature, muscle, all those things we talked about in the sensation words. Those are the things that you kind of want to ask yourself or ask someone else to really lean into that resource. So right now, I definitely invite you all to think about possible resources for yourself. And you can share them in the chat if you want to. You don't have to. But we also want to acknowledge that sometimes resources can have many natures. And what I mean by that is, I just described my resource of imagining myself being with my grandmother, but my grandmother is also deceased. So there may be times where that image does exactly what I want. It brings me joy. It reminds me of the good times, but there might be other times, for instance, maybe on the anniversary of her death or on a day where I really wish I could talk to her, that it becomes unpleasant, that I think about the fact that I can only imagine that scenario. I can't do it in the moment because she's passed away. So it's important to realize that, that it's not black and white, it's not cut and dry. And if you do experience a resource that kind of starts to shift and you're noticing unpleasant sensations, you definitely want to acknowledge that, give a moment to that. So, you know, if I was thinking about my grandmother and all of a sudden I'm thinking about her because I want to move to a pleasant sensation and instead I start crying, I want to acknowledge that, right? It's okay for me to be crying and to have that unpleasant sensation and to feel sad. So to take a moment with that, sit with that, but then try to identify another resource that can help move me out of that unpleasant sensation. And I also just want to say that, you know, it depends. It depends on the situation. Depending what I'm doing that day, I might give myself a good hour to cry and really lean into that sadness, because sadness is okay. But if I know that I am supposed to lead a meeting, pick up my kid from school, I have all these things to do, and I'm like, I'm not functioning as my best self with this resource, then I want to kind of lean into a different resource. So what I might do is, I mentioned earlier in the chat, music is a big resource for me. I love listening to my jams. So as I'm in the car going to pick up my daughter, I might play those songs that I know really do it for me and kind of lean into the good feelings and sensations that those thoughts bring up. So I just want to highlight that because resources are things that bring us joy, and that seems really simple, but as we know, life is complex. So sometimes, depending on the day, one resource might change, and that's okay. Other people I know have talked a lot about compiling a list of resources so that they don't have to, when they're already stressed and they're already having an unpleasant sensation, they don't have to think about it. They just go to their list, and if one's not working, they move to the next. So that's just a suggestion for that. Next slide. And so as we said, this goes together really well with tracking, because obviously you need to be tracking those sensations and what's going on inside, because that's how you'll know when you maybe need to access a resource. And similarly, if sensations switch to more pleasant, that's how you'll kind of know that your resource is working and doing its job. So we definitely invite you to pick a resource, access it, start thinking about it. Again, this is optional, only if you want to participate. But think about that resource, real or imagined, and kind of just take a moment to notice what is going on inside and what sensations you might be experiencing. Think about if those sensations are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we invite you to lean into those pleasant sensations. Okay, in the interest of time, I will just, say that we'll go to the next slide, but this is something that I think it does require practice. So we also invite you all after the workshop to do this activity, to pick a resource, write it down, draw it, think about it, and really notice what's going on inside for as long as feels comfortable to you and as feels pleasant to you. Because as we've mentioned, these CRIM skills, you need to practice them, but also really having that vocabulary of like naming this as a resource. This might be something that you already do without even thinking about it. Once you name it as a resource, it becomes easier to work it into your day. I've shared CRIM skills with my friends and family. So sometimes I will even have, my daughter will notice that I'm getting activated and she will say, I think you need to access a resource right now because you seem like you're getting a little stressed out. So to kind of keep each other accountable, having that vocabulary is really helpful. So we definitely encourage you to do that when you have free time. Next slide. Okay, and I'll throw it back to Mattea or Bianca.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Maureen. And so that was the workshop, everyone. We wanted to let you know that we do go more in depth, but for the sake of time, we were happy to introduce the first 3 wellness skills to you all. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we wanted to add this last part just because we know we have CHWs in the audience, and we wanted to let you know about this opportunity that our office is providing. So this is the Community Resiliency Model teacher training, which is what myself, Mattea, and Maureen went through with the Trauma Resource Institute. So it's to be certified to teach this model and to become a facilitator, certified facilitator. So how that looks like, it's a 40-hour live virtual training. So you don't have to travel anywhere. You can stay at home or the office and take part in this. Right now, we are setting the dates still, but we will have some dates for next year. And so that will look around the springtime of 2023. I think we have 2 cohorts available. We believe that one of them will be just in Spanish and then the other one will be in English. So for those of you that have folks interested or would like to participate in just a Spanish training, they're offering that for the very first time too, which is really exciting. The value of it is around $19.50, but like I said, our office is providing these scholarships specifically for community health workers. And a little bit more about it is we have these requirements that people have to meet. We might be adding to this list. Again, our office is fairly new, and so we're still navigating through creating these structures and streamlining all these things. So these might not be the only requirements in the near future, but these are the ones that we have right now. So that's the definition of a CHW. The CHW must provide direct services to their communities, and the populations that they serve we're emphasizing on Latinx, Native American, and African American communities. And so what you will learn in this training, like I said, it's 40 hours. It's pretty time consuming. It's a total of 5 days. And it's like an entire day of training, but what it includes is you're receiving a lecture, you have constant discussions, groups, there's practice going on. You do a practice run of actually doing your own presentation during the training, so you can practice on the concepts and doing the skills with your team. You have live materials, which is great because you're able to see. I'm going to show you a little pocketbook that they gave me during my training. And so they do give you materials that you can have at home. Everything is mailed out to you, so you can have access to them before the training. Again, it's obviously very, very in-depth, so you learn all the research, all the sciences, stuff about the brain. It's great. I know myself, Mattea, and Maureen could speak to it, but this is kind of like the general approach to this training. And we, as an office, we're trying to, like I said, streamline this a little bit better. So how that looks like after you receive the teacher requirements and to get full certification is you go through the process of through the Trauma Resource Institute. But then also we've added another portion of it through our office. So how that looks like is after you go through it and you receive certification, you let us know about the workshops that you're hosting in your communities. And we've developed a workshop tracker, which is really easy to use. And you could just like upload that information. And why we want to use that information is because we are a grant funded office. And so this is a way for us to continue providing these opportunities for you all, and to let our funders know, like, hey, this is what the community and how they're responding to this training, and just giving them feedback, right? And justifying why we need to provide these scholarships for CHWs. Participate in research, that is, I know we've been asked that, and like, how does that look like for a CHW? So that basically means we ask you, and it's not something definite, right? It's just sometimes things will come up and we might reach out to you and say like, hey, what do you think about this approach, about this training? Or again, sending your evaluations to us and, you know, going through them, and we submit them to our funders. So it's not necessarily you doing a research project with us. It's just, since you all, you know, have this amazing knowledge of working so closely with your communities, that's the information that we'd want to know, and how we need to approach what trainings we provide to you all. And so this is just, you know, a short list of why you could do a or get certified in CREM. We do have a waiting list for 2023. It was very popular, and that's actually super exciting. So if we're able to let our funders know how amazing this is, maybe they give us more money. Who knows? So yeah, this is just a short list. If you're interested, me and Mattea will put our contact information, and obviously you can reach out to Maureen, and Maureen can let us know. But once we have those dates set up and we have everyone's contact information, we can definitely share that out with you all.
I just wanted to share, because it did come up in the chat.
Yeah.
So the program that ASU, that Bianca and Mattea are involved in, they have grants, and those grants cover that 1,950 or whatever it was. That's why there's a waiting list. So when I did the 40-hour training, I paid nothing because I qualified. So that's kind of to answer your question, Sheila, it would be free if you go through them, but that is why there's kind of a wait list and all these different requirements.
Right. And Maureen is a perfect example of the CHWs that we love working with, because Maureen is already like, she went through the training in July, and this was her first workshop. And also congratulations, Maureen, because this was your first facilitated workshop. And so you know, we want those CHWs that are like, yes, I'm going to bring it to my community. These are the workshops I'm going to do. And so Maureen is already doing that, right? And so that's awesome. And whatever feedback she gets, you know, she's going to share it with us, and we'll share it with our funders. So so yeah, that's kind of how those work. And I think right now what we will do also, since it's time for feedback, we're still here for questions, so please put them in the chat. But Mattea, if you can put the link to the evaluations. And so, you know, please take your time to provide feedback. This is part of Maureen's certification. So she's going to show these to the Trauma Resource Institute so she could be fully certified. So we'd really appreciate it if you helped us with filling those out and letting us know how we did. So if there's areas we need to improve on, things we need to add, great things that you liked about it, all of those are welcome. So we welcome everyone's honesty.
Yes. I'm also going to share afterwards, probably early next week, a follow-up email with these slides, with flyers, with more info. I'll also just want to highlight that I'm hosting this Zoom meeting on a shared account, so we can hang out for questions. But if I lose you all, that is because someone else has started their 2 o'clock meeting.
Thank you, Maureen. And here is just like a brief social media. We exist if you want to learn more about our office and how we can possibly collaborate in the future. This is how you can reach out to us. Before I forget, I haven't put my email, but I'll put it in the chat really quick. And this is a way that you can contact us as well. All right, and we'd like to end this with a quote by the creator of the model. And so I'll read it out loud and let that settle with everyone. So, when we bring awareness to the inner wisdom of our bodies, well-being can grow, even in times of great suffering. Moments of gratitude can be seen and sensed. Elaine Miller-Carraz. And there's if you want to learn more about her as well, you can log on to the Trauma Resource Institute website. They provide great resources. There's recordings if you'd want to take a look at. We love working with them. They're such great people.